Hello, in this video we're going to be looking at the MIDI routing plugins that come with the latest version of Gridlock. There's two plugins. There's a Gridlock MIDI out, which takes output from Gridlock. Any of the controllers that you've got set up, you can specify where to take the output from and route it somewhere in Live. And we have the opposite, which is the MIDI in, which I haven't got loaded at the moment. I'll show you that shortly, where we can take MIDI input and send it to any instance of a controller. I'm going to be demoing this on the Launchpad. You can see that I've got the HUD up in the corner, but it's exactly the same for any of the controllers. And even though I'm demonstrating this in Ableton Live, there are patches that do exactly the same functionality in Max, so that you can take the MIDI output from any MIDI configuration you've got set up for the controllers and deliver it to wherever you need. So this config started based on the user 1 config for the Launchpad. I've mangled it up a bit and added a few more things to it, basically just to demonstrate routing of MIDI elsewhere, but also the fact that you can configure your matrices, you've got 4 of them, to kind of suit your workflow and whatever you're doing. So I've configured 2 kind of drum pad areas down the bottom. And coloured them differently, so you can see that. Got a synth line here running a instance of ABL. I've just got a few notes going through to an instance of operator, and then I've got some mapped controls, so I can do things at the same time. So let me show you how I've got this configured. So the bottom corner here is just going through to an 808 kit. So this is exactly how you'd set up if you were just mapping user 1 on the Launchpad. I've just got this going directly into a drum rack. Just to go quickly over the device here, we've got a MIDI channel selection grid at the bottom here. So I've selected MIDI channel 1 here. Here we've got a filter section. I don't know why that's 126. So this is so I can filter out notes and CCs completely or within a range. This is the Gridlock instance it's coming from. I've only got one controller loaded at the moment, so I'm taking my input from controller 1. Got a transpose plus minus 48 here, and this is a MIDI through, which we'll look at later. So basically the way I've got this set up here is that this is sucking MIDI input off channel 1 from Gridlock and sending it out, and that's going into the kit here. As you can see, by default, if you don't rename anything, then Gridlock's going to show you the MIDI mapping of the notes. So you can see I've got N136, which is note channel 1 36 up to 51, which is how the drum rack is organized. So that's why these notes are getting pulled into this track here. So moving on to the next track, I've actually just got a instance of drummers on here. So there's no rack here, this is just going straight into a VST. Drummerzone happens to use the same notes, so if we look over here, you can see that I've got the same 36 to 51 set up, but these are all now, I've assigned these to MIDI channel 2, and you can see here that I'm sucking in channel 2 instead of 1. So now I'm playing the Drummerzone directly off MIDI channel 2. So moving on to the next track, I've got an instance of ABL, and you can see here I've got a load of notes configured on MIDI channel 3, and I'm sucking the input in from 3 here. Now these are configured slightly differently. All of these are momentary switches here, so they operate as long as my finger is down. I've got these set to toggle, and the mode I've got ABL set up to here is just going to play a pattern depending on which MIDI note's coming in. I've also got this set up as a group so that I can only have one element of this group on, and the group is set up to be the 2 rows. So as I change, it automatically turns the last one off, so I can just select a pattern to be playing there, or turn it off to select no pattern. This is also configured to send a note off when any of the members of the groups turn off, so it'll send a note off to stop the previous pattern playing and then start the new pattern. So that's an instance of ABL we've got there, and this is just an instance of operator, and we're sucking in off 4 here, so MIDI channel 4, and again these are set to toggle, so you can see we can turn those in and play 4 notes. These are set to momentary, so we can play around with those, do extra stuff here, have some patterns running, play some drums, etc. There's nothing to stop you sucking the MIDI in from multiple places either. So here, this is playing on 1. I'm also going to make this play on 2. So now I'm playing both kits at the same time. I can also play some notes at the same time as well if I want to. Let's make this pick up of everything. So you have some quite flexible MIDI routing of how you want to take your MIDI setup from pads and route it around in live there. So I've got a pattern set up here which I'm going to play, so that's now just playing, and as you can see nothing's lighting up on the launch pad, and a lot of people like feedback, so this is where the other device comes in handy. So I'm just going to grab a MIDI in device now and put that in here, and should be able to see that we're now getting MIDI feedback, although we're no longer getting any sound, so that's not an ideal situation. So we need to turn on MIDI through. By default, this is the MIDI through. By default, it's off. So even though the MIDI is coming out of here now, and this is routing the MIDI back to the instance of the controller, as we can see, it's no longer passing the MIDI through to the 808 kit. So we just simply turn on the MIDI through, and we've now got feedback going through to the controller. So I'm going to do the same for the next instance as well. So this is playing the same pattern now. So I'm going to go and grab a instance of this. And again, we've got no sound coming out now. So we've got our sound with the MIDI through. So we're not displaying anything on the second drum pad yet, and that's because this is going to be sending the MIDI back to its source. Now, even though we're sucking MIDI here from 2, the actual MIDI coming out of these clips here is going to be on channel 1, because that's where everything lives in Ableton. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to force the MIDI to go back to a channel. So being as though this came from channel 2, I'm going to send it back to channel 2. Okay, and now as you can see, we've got the updates on both of the pads as we expect. The controls are very similar for the in as the out. We have the filter section here again, so we can either choose to route note and CCs forward, or we can turn them all off, or we can limit to a range. As we said, this is the destination MIDI channel, and we've got our MIDI through as well. Incidentally, the lights are blue for if a MIDI through signal is being processed, i.e. something is coming in at the left of the device and being passed out of the device. Yellow for an input signal. In the case of the MIDI out device, that tells us when we're receiving a note from the controller. In this case, we're receiving a note from the external source, so it's the clip in this case. And then green if it's transmitted to the target. So in this case, these notes are coming in and they're being sent out. If I go and click on some notes here, you can see again that yellow is lighting up and the green. If I was actually to turn note off, then you'll see that yellow comes in for the fact that something's coming in, and then there's no green because it's been filtered out. So if you are having MIDI routing problems, that should help you sort out some stuff there. There's another couple of checkboxes down here, and these are for people that are interested in running their own light shows, which a lot of people do, and dealing with an issue that was introduced with the Launchpad Mini and the Launchpad S, or not an issue, but just the fact that you can no longer run the incoming MIDI on a different MIDI channel as you used to be able to do with the original Launchpad. Okay, so I've just added an overview of my Launchpad Mini here, and I've put it to user 1 mode, and I'm going to launch this clip here, which is sending directly to the Launchpad Mini, as you can see. So this is how most people would normally set up their light show. So you can see that I'm getting some random, semi-random dots on the surface here. So what I'm going to do now is just switch through the different modes, and you'll see that I'm still getting the output as it's going to the same MIDI channel as all the other settings I'm using. So if I go into session view, I'm getting random lights lit up. If I go into gridlock view, you can see that they're still appearing there and overwriting the gridlock display. And again on the mixer view. So if I go back to mixer 1 view, which is where I want to see the actual animation, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop an instance of the MIDI in onto this track. Immediately we stop seeing any data on the Launchpad because MIDI through is not on. So this device now is blocking the input coming from here to the output going here, and therefore we're seeing nothing. What we are seeing is an update on Gridlock as we're sending the MIDI data through to Gridlock as we were previously in the demos. So I'm just going to turn that off so we're no longer sending note and CC data through to Gridlock anymore. I'm also going to turn on MIDI through, at which point we start getting data routed from the MIDI clip through to the output, and we start seeing stuff on the Launchpad again. In this setup, it's exactly the same as before, and we're getting the MIDI data sent in all modes. So I'm going to turn on MIDI through filtered at this point. Now what this is doing is using Gridlock to determine when it's sending data through the MIDI device to the output. So if I switch between the modes now, I'm essentially stopping the light show working on the session and the mixer view. Occasionally there is a little bit of bleed through depending on how long it takes Gridlock to shut the MIDI routing down. This is something I'm working on, so there'll hopefully be a solution to that shortly. But for the most part, you're now okay with running the session and mixer view along with your light show. Now, say I also don't want this to appear on Gridlock, which I don't at the moment. However, some people do wish additional lighting to go through, so it's an option for them. But if I turn off the filter now so that we're not sending through to user 2 as well, then you can see that the updates stop there. Obviously I need a refresh of that. So you can see switching between the modes now, I'm also not getting any updates on user 2. I can also turn it off on user 1 if I want, and therefore I'm no longer seeing the light show at all, so you can even MIDI map this control even somewhere on Gridlock itself, so that you can control when the lighting is coming through and not. There's also going to be an update in the near future that's going to support light shows natively in Gridlock, so that you don't have these problems to worry about, and also work across the supported platforms in exactly the same way. Okay, so that's just a quick demo of the new MIDI routing plugins that comes with the latest version of Gridlock. 0.3.54 is the free version, and 0.3.9 is the paid version. I'm going to attach this live set and the drum pad configuration to a post in the forum, so if you want to come and look at it and play around with it, then head on over to the forum at forum.sigabort.co and have a play. See you soon.